decade, I've been talking about all kinds of interactions between people in social situations. But today, I'm talking about the polar opposite, social isolation. It's a cliche to say that human beings are social creatures, but it's also completely true. Even feral children miss the group that they were parted from, a feeling of belonging in some structure out in nature. When those individuals completely removed from human society still crave interactions with those they view as peers, it's more than a tired line we throw around after hours of paperwork. Even short-term isolation for a week or two can have detrimental effects, and studies have shown that health can suffer in this situation. Most of the time it's mental, but enough of that damage will eventually lead to physical repercussions. However, there is another kind of alone that we've all experienced. Alone in the crowd. It seems almost like an oxymoron. How could anyone feel this way, surrounded and even packed shoulder to shoulder with others? Well, because while the crowd gives anonymity, it also steals individuality. It's harder to hurt a single individual than one that's part of a group. We often get lumped into groups for purposes of sorting, but what happens when one man gets lost in the mix without any support network? Could that be just as bad, or even worse, than complete estrangement from society? Well, surprisingly, there's one man we go to for the answer. Tom Hanks. In a film career spanning over 30 years, he's been through a lot on screen. Falling in love with a mermaid, chasing a master of fraud, living 100 lives at once, throwing Marlon Wayans off a bridge. The man's done it all. He's starred in some classic movies, but today we'll focus on two. Castaway and The Terminal. Both involve planes, tragedies, and unexpected long-term stays. So, given their similarities, let's go ahead and compare which had it worse. Tom Hanks or Tom Hanks? Tough choice. Island Tom Hanks works for FedEx, streamlining package shipments around the world. He's got his life down to a minute, no time wasted. In screenwriting class, we had a term for this, and it's called ironic foreshadowing. Oh yeah, he's not been on time for stuff for a while. One night after proposing to his girlfriend, he gets on one last flight before returning home. It goes exactly as planned. Turbulence is normal. From here, he washes up on a desert island and has to survive off the meager resources he has there, the plane wreckage, and waterlogged FedEx packages. Oh, spoiler! He's never going to get that job back at FedEx because he tampered with those packages. Policy is policy, after all. Can't make exceptions for anyone. Now, the other situation. Airport Tom Hanks, who speaks no English because he's from totally Slovakia, arrives in New York after a transatlantic flight. He has a wonderfully pleasant visit, and everything goes according to plan. Turns out Never Going to Revoltistan didn't deserve the name, and he is now the man without a country. If he leaves the airport, he's breaking the law because America will not grant him asylum, and he can't fly back to his war-torn nation. Welcome to the world's longest layover. So now, both Tom Hanks are stranded without any support structure. People unfamiliar with the films may immediately balk at that because, hey, one's at an airport. The resources are known, there are people all around, and this situation is understood by those who run the airport as not his fault. How could that be on par with a deserted island? You're right. Isolated on a desert island removes all the risks that only a bureaucracy can bring.
There's a man walking around the terminal in a bathrobe.
I know, sir. You put him there.
Sometimes you land a small fish, you unhook him very carefully, and you place him back in the water. You set him free so that somebody else can have the pleasure of catching him. He was just at the door.
Right, if we just go a little left.
All right.
I wait.
You didn't see those crashing waves conspiring against Island Hanks. They're just doing their thing. People, on the other hand, they hate complicated paperwork, and this guy is nothing but. So despite the totally different locations, there's many commonalities against long-term survival. Food, shelter, staving off boredom, just keeping engaged. There's dangerous zones that, while tempting, would mean the end of the situation in a most tragic way if they pursue them. Small fortunes come along and lend a hand to survival, and the threat of despondency against seemingly insurmountable odds consuming the man are a daily struggle. Both environments are surprisingly hazardous and extremely difficult to survive in without proper preparation. In one you're Les Stroud, in the other you're a homeless person. Same shtick, different setting. So, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this comparison. social interaction. First, Airport Hanks. He can't even speak the language, so he's left in the dark without a translator as to what's happening in the beginning. Through enough time and persistence, he eventually figures out how to speak English and learns that he's in everyone's way. It's a variation on William Julius Wilson's social isolation through entrenched urban poverty. It has been a while. While Wilson's principle was created to address the self-perpetuating underclass he observed in the growing ghettos, these same principles apply to Airport Hanks. Look at where he lives, for crying out loud. This is the ghetto of the airport. No one asks how he lives or what he does to make a living. They're just happy to have him out of the way so their own lives can continue uninterrupted. That's how class divides work. His tenacity against the situation is part of what keeps his spirits high, though, and eventually the airport staff start to view him favorably. Not as an equal person, but as an asset. Hank struggles with maintaining even the most basic relationships, and once he leaves the airport, these people will never contact him again. He's overportioning on single-serving friends, because that's all airport relationships. Still, that's enough to get him through a tough time. Meanwhile, let's turn the camera to Island Hanks and see how he's handling the lack of conversation. Wilson the Ball, Best Supporting Actor of 2000. Actually, he wasn't nominated because he's a non-character, but he's very effective because the storytelling doesn't have to be over-explained in an obvious way. Speaking of, I'll bring in the DM and have him explain why Wilson is so awesome. Hello? That's weird. He's usually in that very chair, yelling at someone for being dumb. Bacchus is being beaten off screen, isn't he? I want to see that. Well, I suppose I'd hear that. So I guess I'm going to talk about Wilson without him. This all-important ball creates the illusion of interaction, the ultimate straight man or yes man to the situation. But does he really serve such a transparent purpose? What are your thoughts on this D? Hang on, I gotta fix. Alright. There, much better. Hard to spot the difference. So, what are your thoughts on Wilson? Wow. He provides that silent foil, the whiteboard that is key to figuring out the subtle details of each point. Yes! He makes Survivor Man go through his plans and thought processes out loud, an important step for auditory learners to dissect the idea in full. What looks like one man losing his mind is really a man utilizing all the tools at hand to survive this extreme isolation. Okay, and it serves as that friend who silently challenges your every decision, giving your inner doubts an object to express upon. That better? I'm glad you're happy. What became a punchline and running joke for years after this film came out is the reason anyone liked it in the first place. We got to hear what Tom Hanks was thinking throughout as he talked to Wilson in lieu of breaking the fourth wall. This ball is the real reason that he had any kind of social survival in this most desolate of circumstances. That really helped flesh out the point. Thanks, background DM. You're my favorite stand-in since Onion Bubs. So, we've established that these situations are taxing on both the environmental and social fronts, two major facets that are core to survival tested to their extremes by a deserted island and international airport. That means that both Tom Hankses are equally screwed, right? Well, we have one more variable to consider: reintroduction to society. Airport Hanks takes a step out of the terminal into New York City, finally accomplishing what he went there to do in the first place. He's celebrated for a short time, then returns to his native country, ultimately no worse for wear. His story will make a short human interest piece in a newspaper, possibly a magazine article a couple months down the road. Like most layovers, it's annoying while it's happening, but quickly forgotten once it's passed. Everything just goes back to the way it was. Island Hanks, that's a different story. While he also receives celebration from those people he knew once he's rescued, there's a distinct difference. Airport Hanks was just lost luggage waiting to be found, whereas Island Hanks was presumed dead. Also, his stay wasn't just for 9 months, but 4 years. That's a lot of time to forget how society works. I mean, he still knows the basics, but ultimately he's going to see the empty gestures and the fake smiles that adults have to practice day to day to get through just as pointless. I mean, how frivolous would that feel if you just spent half a decade making sure you could spear a fish so you wouldn't starve for the next day? I mean, it puts it in perspective. Plus, who's going to be waiting for him? When Island Hanks returns, there's no true home for him to come back to. His life moved on after he's pronounced dead. Now he has to start a new one. Airport Hanks, on the other hand, while his country did suffer that revolt, never lost his social graces or had himself declared dead. His life was on pause. The others was declared over. It's kind of hard to restart from that. Airport Hanks is going to have a much easier time coming back into the fold than his island-going counterpart because of the way society works and what it values. If someone says, I can spear a fish from across the lake, you go, wow, that's impressive. You must be a fisherman. Otherwise, why would you need to do that? However, you say, I got stuck in an airport and learned another language, people go, that's fantastic. See? Different value sets. Airport Hanks, he came away with something culture can look at and go, that was worthwhile. Island-going Hanks, it's, that sucked. What are you going to do now? Now, there are some, including the creators and star of Castaway, that say the best thing that happened in Island Hank's life was that island. While it didn't turn him into a hood-wearing archer vigilante, it forced him to reevaluate what was most important in life. Strip away the watch, the deadlines, the constant pressure to please the boss, and who are you? That's what he discovered. Airport Hanks never got away from the system, even though it tried its best to fully ignore him. But the island-going one, he really did get that reset. He has a fresh perspective, and he is disconnected. And maybe he's going to turn into a better person because of it. Airport Hanks, it was a bump in the road. Island Hanks will never be that same guy he once was. Did that plane crash actually do Island Tom Hanks a favor? Or did Airport Tom Hanks still turn out on top after the ordeal? You know, I really can't decide. Seriously, arguments on both sides are strong, so I leave it to you. Comment which one you think ended up better off at the end. I'm curious to see. I'm Socio, and you're all part of my data now.
There's nothing left for me to be. I'm here alone in isolation. Have no choice but be isolated, struggling left alone apart. Pushed aside, face segregation, struggling left alone apart.
Oh, hang on. Remind me next time just to wash my hand. Oh.